Good evening from Barcelona. I am Victor Sorensen, director of the APJ, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this activity and to be the moderator of a new session of the Jewish Heritage Heart Talks. Thank you very much for your participation here today. As usual, we have with us Elise Lieberman, director of the Taubes Center in Warsaw, former Hillel director. She was the founding principal of the Lauder Morasha Day School in Warsaw and has served as a consultant to the Rothschild Foundation, Hanadiv Europe, the Westbury Group, Polymuseum of the History of Polish Jews, and to the JDC Baltics. Liz also was awarded with the Benemerito Medal by the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2015. Hi, Elise, how are you? Elise, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you for that request. It comes so infrequently. So it's delightful to be here. Very excited to be here with Ruth and Karon and with you for this next segment. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Elise. Then we have Ruth Ellen Gruber, Director of Jewish Heritage Europe, an award-winning writer. She has been involved in Jewish heritage work for 3 decades and is the author of several key books on Jewish heritage, travel, and cultural issues. Also, Ruth has been touring lately, so she's coming with a very fresh view and approach to Jewish heritage. We go to Florence with her. Hi, Ruth. How are you?
Hi, Victor. Hi, Elise. Hi, Karen. Hi, Federico. I'm a little tired. Otherwise, I'm fine. I've been on the road for 3 weeks, so right.
Well, that's the cost for being touring these last days. Ruth, happy to have you here and to count on you for this presentation. And in addition, we have today a very special guest, Karon Sedhill, Program Manager Europe at the National Library of Israel. She's managing Gesher LeEuropa, part of the library's ambition to become the library of the Jewish people worldwide, sharing the National Library of Israel collections in creative ways and engaging people with shared interests, working in Jewish settings. We go to Jerusalem. Hi, Karon. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much. And actually a bit envious of you, Ruth, because we really can't go anywhere from here. So, you know, everybody wants something. The grass is always greener, but I'm very flattered to be part of this discussion.
It's our pleasure. Thank you, Karon. Well, just a brief introduction to this session. I want to share with you that Elise, Karon, and Ruth are a reference in their field, a constant source of inspiration, and all 3 play a key role in the field of European Jewish heritage. And these give us clues to see that the conversation we are going to have with them today is going to be very relevant. They are at the forefront of work in the management and promotion of Jewish heritage in Europe with a very transversal perspective, leading trend-setting projects. And not only that, personally, it's a great honor to moderate this table. It's very special because not only are people that I consider very close, but I also have had the opportunity to work with the 3 of them in different projects, and it has always been a very enriching experience. Before I begin, I would like to share with you the framework where we are conducting this session today. Since last September the 5th, the European Days of Jewish Culture are taking place all over Europe. A festival that we coordinate from the APJ with the support of a large network of institutions and in collaboration with the National Library of Israel, which each year works producing content tailor-made to the theme of the year. In this case, the central theme is a dialogue for this 22nd edition. Thus, the National Library of Israel has produced and designed an exhibition on the theme, which explores the role of dialogue in Judaism from very different perspectives: generational, intertextual, from the community perspective, cultural, and also interreligious. This exhibition has been translated into different languages and can already be visited in different European cities. But this year, in addition, the festival takes place within a European project called NOA, Networks Overcoming Antisemitism, a project led by the institution FEJI, a Jewish contribution to an inclusive Europe, which together with other European Jewish networks develops a comprehensive strategy to combat anti-Semitism in Europe. And Jewish heritage and culture are understood in this frame as an integral part of this effort. In this festival, dialogue is understood as both as a means and an end. Not only do we explore the role of dialogue in Jewish history, but also as a means to promote the dialogue within our institutions. And we strongly believe in dialogue as a call to action, an invitation to promote mutual enrichment. As Zygmunt Bauman said, the real dialogue is not talking to people who think the same as you. And that is the challenge. This is the engine that drives the festival this year. And how could be otherwise? It is also the tool to reflect on the European Jewish heritage today. And for that, I can think of no better than Ruth, Caron, and Elise. Focusing on today's session, I would like to share with you the dynamics of this activity. These Jewish Heritage Hard Talks take as a reference the article, the 10 Other Commandments for the Care of Jewish Heritage by Sally Berkovic, CEO of the Rothschild Foundation Hanadiv Europe. Her provocative list challenged the ways we think about Jewish heritage, the way we preserve and promote it, and the ways we use it for tourism, worship, education, commemoration, and more. The commandments provide a framework to look back at what has happened in the decades since the Holocaust, assess the current situation, and look ahead. The article was published on Shavuot 2020, and we have already talked about it in several occasions with different guests, always with Elise and Ruth. But not only that, in 2021, Daniela Graeber, Jewish Education Grants Program Manager at the Rothschild Foundation Hanadiv Europe, added content to the discussion with a new article in Shavuot of this year, with a new perspective, offering 10 commandments for how European Jewish communities can use their local Jewish heritage to bolster their Jewish education. As you can see, this is an open debate with continuity in time, which served as a catalyst to promote a dialogue about all those fields that converge in the work on the Jewish heritage: research, education, volunteering, memory, cultural tourism, narratives. Today, each of the speakers will focus, first of all, on one or two commandments related to some of the fields I have just mentioned. They will be brief presentation and they will open the discussion among all. We will try to reserve some time for Q&A, and of course, you can use the chat of Zoom to share your questions during the session. Now, let's get started. I will give the floor to Ruth, who is going to comment on the commandments related to the preservation and work in Jewish cemeteries, as well on the key role of volunteers in the work of preservation and promotion of Jewish heritage. Ruth, the floor is yours. Ruth, you need to unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted. I'm unmuted.
Excellent.
Thank you, Victor. So I'll be talking about Jewish cemeteries and their role in education, the storehouse of knowledge that they comprise, and also some of the good ways which I've seen and some of the ways which I consider very problematic, the way they're treated. There may be 10,000 Jewish cemeteries in Europe. Most, probably at least in Eastern Europe and in Central Europe, are neglected, abandoned. We know this situation. I've just been on a very long trip in several countries in Central and East Central Europe. And I visited quite a number of Jewish cemeteries to see what's being done there, how they're being preserved, and what we can learn from them. And I just would like to comment, because I think just the comments on what I've seen will show the different ways, which I consider quite positive, and ways which I don't consider positive. One of the cemeteries that I saw was in Eisenstadt in Austria, where there's been an incredible project carried out by the director of the Austrian Jewish Museum in Eisenstadt, Johannes Ries, who's an expert on Jewish cemetery inscriptions. And he already had a database of all of the more than 1,000 headstones in the old Jewish cemetery there and in the newer Jewish cemetery there. But what he's done as a tool is to put QR codes on stickers on every single headstone in these Jewish cemeteries, which if you go there with your cell phone, you can connect to the QR code and connect automatically and instantly to the information about that headstone online. That is a photograph, the epigraph, the translation of the epitaph, and sometimes other information of the person who's buried there. It's an incredible job, a vast job, and really serves as a way that you can get to know the Jewish cemetery as more than just something to look at, if you're not going there to see just one grave. From Austria, in Czech Republic, I saw several examples of how Jewish cemeteries can be just visited and you find signage on site. Even hidden cemeteries. I went to a cemetery in Podjezy, which is a village where the cemetery was signposted from the main road. You follow the signpost, you follow a trail, you go into a forest, and you find the cemetery, which is quite well maintained, in the middle of the forest. But there's an information panel there that gives the history of the cemetery and tells about the Jewish community there. So it's a way that hikers, visitors, it's a village where Jews have not lived since long before the Holocaust. It was one of the communities, I believe, that was dissolved in the late 19th century when Jews moved from the villages into the major cities. In Poland, I had many discussions with people who deal with Jewish cemeteries, including people who are involved with what's called the Leaders of Dialogue Network, which is run by an NGO called the. These are people who in the southeast of Poland who have taken upon themselves, they're not Jewish, but they have taken it upon themselves as caretakers of local heritage to spend their time restoring and cleaning up local Jewish heritage in this far southeast corner of Poland. And they're part of a network of dozens of people around the country which do the same thing. And now there's more than one network of people like this in Poland. There's this Leaders of Dialogue, and many of them are also now part of the Coalition of Guardians of Jewish Cemeteries, which is sort of a broader network, which includes institutions as well as people. In Hungary, I came across a situation which I find very problematic. And it's done with goodwill, but to my mind, it's counterproductive. And this is building walls around Jewish cemeteries. I believe Jewish cemeteries need to be fenced in order to protect them. But I don't believe they need to be fenced with 2-meter high solid concrete walls, which don't allow access to the cemetery and don't even allow you to see the cemetery. This is quite a common practice. There are some religious groups who carry this out as a way to protect the cemetery. And also there's an NGO called the European Jewish Cemetery Initiative, and they fence cemeteries, and some of the fences are this concrete type that totally surrounds the cemetery and you can't see it. To my mind, that ghettoizes the Jews. That separates the Jews from the rest of the historic community. And in many ways puts them out of sight, out of mind, and sends a message to local people that Jews didn't have anything to do with the local community, with the local scene, that they were something apart. And to me, this is very troublesome. And it's you can't get into these places. In one place I went, the woman who used to have the key no longer has the key, so she couldn't let me in, though I could see, through the door, the gate into the cemetery. But what it does is remove the Jewish history from the history of the town. It protects, okay, but if somebody wants to vandalize, they can climb over the fence. But it really sort of sends a message that nobody has to care for these cemeteries, that they don't mean anything to the local people, they don't mean anything to the country. So that I found counterproductive, even if it was done with good intentions. So I have a lot more to say about this, including vandalism committed in cemeteries by people who are saying that they restore them. But we can get to this in the discussion later. So thanks.
Excellent, Ruth. Thank you so much. I think that you are pointing out very important issues. There's different questions that I think that arise from what you were saying. We will, or I will ask you to maybe answer a couple of things related to that. For example, as you were saying, goodwill is not always is not enough, no? And in this particular case, when we are talking about Jewish cemeteries, we need to talk about the strategies that are integral in some way, that needs to connect protection, education, promotion, etc., etc. We will be back on that. Thanks for your presentation. We are going to continue with Elise. Elise is going to comment on commandment number 4, that it's an interesting one, and that it says that shall be constantly surprised while traveling the Jewish world. I think that it's also interesting because sometimes it's another very controversial topic, and also it's interesting because Elise usually explores the commandment that connects education and heritage. So it will be a pleasure to hear her talking about this topic. So Elise, the floor is yours.
Victor, thank you. And it's an honor and pleasure to speak after Ruth. Ruth, you're one of the few people I know who's been out in the field, and I'm happy to hear that you are reconnecting with your professional life. It's a gift to all of us. And you bring some different perspectives also to how I want to think about this commandment. I just also want to say hello to some very dear friends who joined us. I'm very happy to have you here, and new faces, happy to meet you. So I chose 4. I tend to choose, as Victor said, to focus on education. I think it's all about education. So it comes out in different ways. And I haven't spoken to Sally about this, but I would add one piece. And Jewish texts allow us to add and create midrash and to discuss. And certainly a page of Talmud gives us the opportunity to look at both sides or all sides of a particular issue. So I was going to suggest that thou shalt be constantly surprised while traveling the Jewish world, and thou shalt engage in personal dialogue with the people and the place, the past and the present. There's been a lot of discussion, especially now during COVID. How do we visit places? We can sit in our living room just as we are now. We can talk to each other. I can show you photos. I can show you videos, which are all very nice. And I can narrate a story. But that does not preclude you and I and the place being in the same space at the same time. So one of the issues I would bring to this conversation through tourism, but educational heritage tourism and preservation and using the resources that we will hear from Karon, is how do we act responsibly as visitors to Jewish sites? How do we engage with the site? How can we be critical and supportive at the same time? And how do we go beyond information? I'm not just saying that about signage and the guidebook and the guide, but how do we really transcend that and actually spend a little time in the place? And obviously, those happy spaces or live spaces are easier. And I speak obviously from experience, gained and gaining experience in Poland, that this is a challenge when you come to a place that people may assume, not correctly so, that there are only ghosts. But we talk to ghosts all the time. We talk to the Dybbuk, we do. So the question is, how do we engage? So I want to start with a story. I went to Dubrovnik for a few days several years ago. And I told myself, no visiting Jewish sites. No, no, no. So obviously, the first thing I do is get a map. I really like paper maps because then you can see the whole piece and you don't have to push your finger. And if you use a map, or for those of you who remember paper maps and not Google and GPS, you would fold it. And by the time you were done, it would have little shreddy pieces and you could really see, you know, the shlada, the sort of shadows of where you've been. So the first thing I do, of course, find the map. And what does my eye go to? Synagogue Street. And where do I go first? Synagogue Street. And I'm drawn to it. And I think that we have to allow ourselves to be drawn to it. Sometimes we want to see it because someone told us, and sometimes we feel obligated. But I think it's that I was drawn. And it's a beautiful synagogue, for those of you who've been there. And it's turned into a museum. So Ruth, I'm sure you've been there and several other people have been there. And if I remember correctly, it was a rather kind of straightforward museum. No interactive, but it's beautifully preserved. And my first thought was, oh, how sad. Where are the Jews of Dubrovnik? And that piece was clearly missing. But I felt sad that it wasn't being used as a synagogue anymore. Now, this is an appropriate use of Jewish cultural heritage or Jewish religious heritage, so that wasn't the issue. But then I realized that if we understand the term synagogue as we use it in Hebrew as a Beit Knesset, a house of gathering, then this continued to serve this role. There were people from all over the world, largely Jews, who had come to see the remnants of and the history of Jews in Dubrovnik. So I began to think about sometimes, and one of the commandments that deals with the sacrosanct piece of synagogues, but do they play a role other than telling a story, being a pilgrimage site? If Jews and others gather and give it life, then I think that it has really, it still serves a very, very important purpose. So when we are traveling, what happens? I don't think this is very challenging, but for me, and I want us to think about it, is many of us come from distinctive communities. We read, we taste different foods, we know people of different minhagim, different traditions, but until we go to visit, we see ourselves as part of a community, and we talk about ourselves as Am Yisrael, for those of you who are Jewish, the Jewish people. But until you travel and touch those spots, it isn't kind of an amorphous feeling, except in terms of kind of religious historical perception. When you realize that all these places, past and present, are part of Jewish peoplehood or the Jewish people, suddenly these are not abstract peoplehood. These are people, or these are a past, and this is part of who I am. So in a sense, traveling to Jewish spaces and Jewish places and meeting Jews and reading and hearing from non-Jews about how one talks about Jews that were there or are, you suddenly are confronted with the fact that there's a peoplehood out there and we have different heritages that we're responsible for. We learn to actually engage in different minhagim, in different traditions. We don't just read about them, we just don't sample. We actually eat them and we hear them. And we learn how some of those traditions, the tradition of not agreeing becomes, I'm sure all of you know, is that, you know, we have 3 shuls, I don't go to 2 or I don't go to 3, whatever that the joke is. But those little nuances are really important. And I think that without travel and without being, those nuances are hard to glean from either the written word or even a well-done video. I find that I'm pushed, I hope we all are, to really delve into history. Oh yeah, read about it, heard about it, but suddenly I want to know more because I have a personal relationship with that place. I don't know about you, but I collect weather on my phone. If I've been to a place, I look for the weather and then I leave it there as long as I can. And it reminds me, you know, sometimes, by the way, Shelly, I see you, I go to Jerusalem because I really want warm, sunny Yerushalayim, Avirah, the air of Jerusalem. So I push it, but of course I'm still in Warsaw. So there's a limit to how impactful it is. But it's the idea that we as travelers are widening our world by by including more and more communal Jewish spaces in that. And I think perhaps the most profound and one of the most difficult things that we face, either as visitors or as people who serve visitors, as we do at the Toby Center, is how do you really connect with that value of transmitting Jewish heritage? Whether it's visiting a synagogue, whether it's praying in the synagogue, whether it's going to a cemetery, whether it's going to a museum, how do we do it in such a way that all of these pieces can then come together and help us feel that we're part of the story? We have to be in the photo and not just taking the photo. And so I think that Jewish traveling Jewishly, whichever, allows us to really engage in Jewish history and the Jewish people in Europe, wherever we are, in Israel, the United States, and to really come to terms with what is our heritage and what are we responsible to transmit. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Elise. Thank you so much. I think that in some way you are always like moving from one area to the other, because obviously they are completely interconnected, no? Cultural tourism, education. I also think that the work that the Taubi is developing, it's a real reference, because the way that you understand Jewish heritage and you work with Jewish heritage as a kind of living laboratory, you know, where you are like delving into the past, but also looking for the meanings of in the present, but also looking to the future, no? And that's marvelous. I have also questions for you, Elise. So after in the debate, I'm going to share it. Yes, please take notes. And now we are going to go to Jerusalem with Karen. Karen is going to comment on commandment number 9, which connects heritage and education, a field that the National Library of Israel is working on in a very creative, also dynamic, and also rigorous way, no? So, Karen, it's a pleasure to have you here again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you again. Well, this is my first time, and I'm very happy to be invited to join this wonderful group, and especially to be working together with all of the three of you who are so dedicated to different aspects of Jewish heritage. And in a way, I'm going to have to now flip the discussion away from the built and the tangible heritage to virtual, because one of the challenges we have in the library in Jerusalem is how do we actually create meaning for the amazing collections and millions of items that we have stacked down many floors below where I'm sitting now at the library in Jerusalem. Not to even mention, and Shelley has sent me a little message about how we can't, as I said before, travel and engage, but we still need to try and make meaning for our audiences. And in that spirit, because I'm not talking about places I'm going to share a presentation with you, using my privilege as a guest to this event. And as Richter said, we're talking about dialogue, and we're talking about the 9th commandment. And Elise, thank you for generously letting me use your education commandment, integrating a broad understanding of Jewish heritage into the contemporary Jewish education landscape, which I think connects with dialogue and connects with what the National Library has been trying to develop in Europe these last years. In fact, I think we can think about the library and ours, all libraries, and ours in particular, as a metaphor for dialogue. Our collections have evolved since 1892. Each layer added to our collections is another part of that conversation, the dialogue between writers, thinkers, historians, throughout the generations. We can think about the library as a dialogue between time and space. Here's 2 items, the same item, it's a Haggadah for Pesach, but they're from completely different places and different contexts in terms of time. So I just want to give you a little bit of background. I know some of you have been in contact with the library about what we're doing in Europe and how and why Geshe l'Europa has been evolved. It was conceived by the National Library together with Rothschild Foundation Hanadiv Europe in order to connect Jewish heritage institutions and communities, in Europe with the library, with both our collections and our people. And this ambition is part of the larger, wider renewal program of the library that was launched in 2011, which, amongst other things, and as Victor reminded us earlier, that the library aspires to become the library of the Jewish people. And I have to say the Jewish people have not phoned us up and asked us to be their library, but we have taken that on as our mission. And I must also mention that in the sort of physical realm, we have been talking about built heritage, that a major milestone in this renewal is going to be hopefully reached next year when we move to our beautiful landmark new building in Jerusalem. And here's a little preview image of what the library will look like and our reading rooms, which will be stupendous. These rooms and our archive and library collections hold rich repositories of material that need to add meaning and value to the lives of communities, Jewish and non-Jewish, and now virtually to engage with global audiences. And increasingly all heritage institutions, including the NLI, are bringing their collections to life through educational and cultural initiatives. They're attracting new audiences to come into their buildings, but also going out to the communities to see them on their turf, on their own terms. And of course, working virtually, as we're doing right now, brings exponential possibilities, which I can say is one of the silver linings of the pandemic. However, the path between theory and practice, whilst paved with good intention, raises new considerations and dilemmas. And these are heightened even more for us in the National Library, based here in Jerusalem, where we're trying to be relevant globally, but also meaningful at the local level. And there are people who argue that we should actually stay in our traditional roles, that we should continue to collect, to preserve history and traditions through our collections and our repositories, to continue to provide services for researchers and historians, but that we should be very careful about going beyond this remit, to use our materials to educate, transmit knowledge and ideas, and be modest about what we claim the influence can be on wider society. For example, bringing together greater communal understanding, social and communal cohesion. And I'm saying this in the light of the NOA angle of this dialogue-themed European Day. Josh Teplitsky, in his book Prince of Press, talks about the thin boundaries between books as objects and the social words that create them. And this is where I think the dialogue really happens. As the role of the renewed National Library has taken on is to tell the Jewish story. And this is something that can only happen in partnership with Jewish communities and Jewish educators, because the story is continuing to play out around the world. And this is what we've tried to highlight in the exhibition that we produced on dialogue, which is being displayed at venues all across Europe in different languages. And with your permission, or even without your permission, I'm going to show you a few very, very small highlights of the exhibition, the way that we have looked at the theme of dialogue. Here's the Higazata Levincha, sort of passing on. We have many images. I'll just say that they are panels themed on 4 themes with text and different images that can be arranged in different ways depending on the venue. And here's a dialogue that happens between generations. There's also oral histories that are happening and are very current in the way that we record our heritage. Dialogue between texts. That we've mentioned the Talmud and the building up and the layers of discussion. Here's an example. There's even someone there that I know that Shelley, you will recognize, of dialogue through chavrota and conversation. Dialogue within the community. The Pinkas Kihila, the community register, is a very rich resource of understanding the dilemmas and the discussions that go on in Jewish life. Dialogue between cultures. Here's the Duolingo app on Yiddish, and there's many examples of how local cultures influence in Jewish life. between religions. Here we have, in terms of philosophy, a poster celebrating the 800th anniversary. What's written on the notice is to celebrate the birth of the famous Cordovan philosopher Maimonides. For them, he is a universal commentator on life. For us, he is the Rambam. So I've just done a spoiler of my next slide, but I'm just going to keep that up there. So that was just sort of an example of how you can see how with partners like AEPJ, we're trying to use our collections to connect people in the Jewish diaspora with their historic legacy, as our collections reflect them. And many communities have rich Jewish collections literally on their doorstep in both Jewish and state institutions, but they're often not aware of them, let alone most of them are not being used in schools or in informal education. Now, we need to avoid a one-size-fits-all approach, and at the same time, we have to be practical. We can't produce individual versions of everything that we do, but we have to find ways to for people to make their own personal emotional connection through their material. And here is an example. I also was thinking about the small Tehillim book that Sharansky received, Anatan Sharansky got from his wife Avital, and sustained his faith throughout his time in prison and beyond. And we've recently received the archive from the family of Chana Senesh, which have got immensely emotional material. We have her book, we have her diaries, and what's on the right of your screens is the last note that was found in her clothes after she was executed, the last note to her mother. I mean, that's extremely powerful. And those are the ways that we need to create that engagement with materials. For those of us that can't go to the site that Elise and Ruth have been discussing. And I just want to give a shout out to another commandment in Sally's list, Commandment 7, about guarding your archives and implementing an effective collection policy, because we really need to facilitate greater understanding of the importance of archival material, but to also for people to know that they are part of that story. We need to have them contribute and be part of that, because what we collect and document today will be the historic legacy of future generations. And here's a very good example of the ephemera collection that we've been collecting over the last 1.5 years, over 5,000 items from all over the world, which are documenting how the Jewish world in its variety is dealing with Corona. Some of these are obvious. You can see a little vocab book of new Yiddish phrases relating to the coronavirus. So those are, these are sort of very real and current examples. So this has to be a participatory process. Jewish memory institutions could and should play a multifaceted role in enriching local Jewish communal life through education work that involves educators and students. Here's an example from the map room in the library. We're about to launch this beautiful B'nai Mitzvah program, which will be available at the moment in English and in Hebrew, but is going to be translated into different languages, which has been created really to get the kids to participate, children who are reaching that stage in their life, in all different thoughts and processes, and to contribute. The chapter 13 is writing their own chapter, which we will then take and include in the collections of the library. We also need to inform and enlighten the wider public and the researcher public, the wider public through the work we've been doing with the European Day and the great opportunity it gives us to share our collections with really wide, diverse publics. Here's a service that we give to the research community, J-Press, which is the digitized Jewish historical press collection. We do training for people who are working with Jewish heritage. We realize that if we're going to sustain this in the future, we need to ensure that the people have the latest technology and have the latest understanding of what's in their collections. We've got Jewish collections. So I'm going to end with some of the questions that we grapple with when we're planning with our work in Europe, and maybe we can discuss those. What is our mandate in recurating our collections to meet the needs of these different groups? How can we use our heritage resources to create a participative experience that really inspires and sparks the imagination of young people to feel part of a global Jewish story? And what are the limits? Are there limits we should be putting on these aspirations? Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you so much. I think that in some way, you know, this challenge that you are facing, and together with your team on how to create this bridge between archives and collections and the general public, it's a major one, and it's I think a key. Plays a key role in the work that we are all doing in the field of Jewish heritage. We are going to open a bit this debate together with Ruth and Elise. For the people that are participating, I invite you to write questions or comments on the chat to include it in the discussion, and maybe to get started with this new part of the session. I will ask you a question, and obviously, Elise, Ruth, Karen, if you want to add other questions like Karen, please feel free and elaborate on those issues that you feel more comfortable. It's an open discussion, but. Something that I think it was common, it was in common on your interventions is on how we can create these meaningful experiences when we are visiting or working on Jewish heritage sites. No? And there's a couple of elements that you've been presenting as, for example, co-participation or the role of education in this sense. But I wanted to ask you, on your point of view and with your experience, what are the elements that you define as keys in order to develop these kinds of meaningful experiences connected with Jewish heritage? Maybe we can start with Ruth.
Okay. Thanks, Victor. I think everything to me boils down to the fact that today, when people, let's say in schools or whatever, people learn how Jews were killed. There's a lot of Holocaust education. And in classrooms, you know, in many countries, there's Holocaust Remembrance Day, commemorations, school courses. People spend a lot of time learning and discussing how Jews were brutalized and killed. They don't spend that much time teaching, learning, discussing how Jews lived and live. Jews did not sit around in Europe for 1,000 years and more waiting for the Holocaust, waiting to be killed. There were horrible pogroms, there were expulsions and all that, but Jews lived rich, full, creative lives. And if I go back to the cemeteries are often called houses of living, and these show life. They show people who live there. If I want somebody to go, you know, if somebody wants to go and visit the Auschwitz death camp, I try to make sure they also go to the Jewish Museum in Oświęcim, the town near Auschwitz, which does not show how Jews were killed, but shows how the Jews in that town, which was a majority Jewish town before the war, lived. There was a deputy mayor, they ran cafes, they did all sorts of things. And this life gets lost. And I think in the library, you have the resources to sort of, sort of give some in-depth teaching about this. European Day of Jewish Culture focuses on this life. And I think this is one of the most important things about the European Day of Jewish Culture, that it focuses on life and living and not on brutality and brutalization and death. And, you know, Jews did not wear striped pajamas. They did not have sad eyes and cry all the time. They lived full lives. And this is what I would like to see more of. And I think Jewish heritage sites, the physical remainders that remain, that still stand, these are tangible touchstones which can anchor discussions and teaching and learning about life, not necessarily, I mean, there's the death aspect too, there's the destruction, but they represent something. If you see a cemetery that's full of 10,000 gravestones, that means that there was a huge population there. How do they live? Who were these people? And that's why projects such as Johannes Ries's project with the QR codes, which tell you what these inscriptions say, is so important. And this is why I think fencing off, walling off the cemeteries as if they don't exist for the rest of the city, how that's counterproductive.
Absolutely. So we are talking about the perspective on how we approach Jewish heritage, but also the narratives that are being developed behind those sites. Elise, please.
Well, I mean, you know me well, and I quite agree with Ruth. I think that as educators, all of us are very aware of that challenge of making sure that this thread continues. There are, as Ruth points out, there are triumphs and tragedies, and that's our job, our role, all of our roles, and whatever kind of resources that we are calling to mind and to the table, is to use, is to come and look at it like a hologram, right? You can't look at just Jewish heritage or history or an event or a person from one side. You've got to create, for those who are somehow engaged, a kind of hologram so they see whatever it is from 360 degrees. And I think that another piece that would be helpful is for us to dust off some words that are really good words. So with all due respect, Caron, but the word archives often calls to mind this very dusty, totally, balagan, messy, only researchers go there. But when you bring it down to the level that we all have archives in our house, we just call it piles or boxes or memory boxes. I think we begin to understand that, we have our personal archives, we have our communal, collections. And so, I mean, the one that really brings it home for me, of course, is Ringelblumen archives, because it may narrate the story of life and death, but the essential piece of that archive is the collection, preservation, and telling the story in real time. So when I understand that, archives are rich and not dusty, they're vibrant and not black and white, then suddenly, I mean, even the word heritage, this is a good word. We have to put it back in the, the vernacular of education, whether it's informal or formal. So I think also building on what Ruth said, it's the perspective we take, and it's the words that we use and how those words are really understood to connect to those resources.
Aaron, please go ahead.
Reminded me, Elise, I took my granddaughters to an event in the library, and they had them all lined up in just outside the reading room, and they asked the children, how many of you have got an archive at home? And nobody put their hands up. And then, how many of you have got a place where you keep your special things? And they all put their hands up. So that's very true. Relating to what you said, Ruth, I think, and to Victor, your question, I think one of the elements that is really important is authenticity. And there are many people, and I can see that there's a comment from here, a question from Anthony Jacobson, who are putting a different gloss on many of the historic places that people are visiting. There are and you showed me in Barcelona these tiny little signs of Jewish presence. And I think that's where we can, and you and I have been discussing, bring authentic materials that actually tell the story and prove the life that was there before. And we need to think more about how we do that. The QR code for what's written on the stone is hugely important, but we can also see, how we can use our materials to better effect in heritage sites. I have to say, on my only visit to Auschwitz, the most affirming and almost comforting thing we did afterwards was to go to the cemetery in Czestochowa and to work in the cemetery and to just feel a connection with ordinary Jewish people and their lives, and respect and give them the respect that's due to them. So that's, I think, authenticity is very important in all of this.
Thank you, Caron. Another question that I would like to bring to this table. Also, thank you, Anthony and Jay Cohen, for your comments. Aaron was commenting on the one that Anthony Jacobson was writing. Also, Elise, Ruth, if you want to comment on that, please feel free. Another question that I want to bring is what we that very connected with what Ruth was saying, also with Elise and Karen, in this way of saying, okay, authenticity, education, but what can we do with those initiatives that we found controversial? With these initiatives that we are thinking, this needs really a different approach. I think that some of the clues for successful Jewish heritage projects were mentioned here, no? And I think that always it's very necessary to have a very transversal approach, to bring researchers, cultural managers, people from very different fields in order to work together. No, but also we are facing with controversial issues, difficulties, things that we don't like. What can we do, or how we can stand in front of all of this? No?
How much time do we have, Victor?
3 hours. No. Around, I will say, 10 minutes in total.
It's I mean, the one of the challenges is that not everybody thinks alike, and you know, there's a case that I've been following, and we've been publishing on Jewish Heritage Europe right now, about the historic Jewish cemetery in a village called Satanov in Ukraine, where there's nobody in charge of it. And one of the, you know, religious people who goes around making oils to honor rabbis seems to have gone in and without authorization, or with just, you know, the local people saying, oh, it's a Jew coming in to put the cemetery right, so isn't that great? But he disregarded this cemetery as a historical place, has pulled up the gravestones, lined them up in straight lines so they're nice and neat, but they no longer mark the graves that they were on top of, and put them in concrete. And you know, for some people, this makes it look really nice. And it's clean, it's neat, but it's not the cemetery is a historical site, and it's also always a cemetery. There are people buried there, and the gravestones no longer mark the graves. So on the one hand, you know, he's applauded for what he's doing, and I'm sure that the local authorities would be afraid to have said anything against this type of what I would call desecration or vandalism, what others call restoration or cleanup, because they would be afraid of being accused of anti-Semitism. You see it not just there, you see it in other cases where somebody goes in, a Jew goes in, does something which is clearly not. I can think of examples in Poland where a Jewish community or Jews go in, do something that, you know, disregards the site as a historical site, even if it's a historical site. But monuments preservation people, they won't say anything because they're being afraid of being accused of anti-Semitism. It's like the cemeteries that I saw walled off in Hungary. So, you know, you have these challenges where for some sectors of Jewish society, this is the right thing to do, but for others, it's totally wrong thing to do. But how to convince the one side that a historical site shouldn't be tampered with, or a historical site needs to be dealt with as a historical site, and there are best practices in preserving sites. It's happened in Ukraine. Another in Ukraine is when, you know, a synagogue that's active synagogue got a grant to restore the fresco, the wall paintings in it, and instead of restoring them, overpainted them like a paint by numbers thing. And, you know, the congregation loves it, but it basically destroyed the historical monument that was the synagogue. So how to reconcile these different elements and these different, you know, viewpoints or sectors or realities, because they are different realities.
And normally, like in the last years, I think that it's common to say that heritage management always imply negotiation between community and heritage practitioners, and maybe between the within the same institution, as Karen was presenting. No, what is the role of the archive? What are the limits? How do you see that we can channel this necessary negotiation and dialogues? Maybe like I think that Ruth was presenting a very revealing example, but for example, Elise or Karen, those are questions that I think that also you are facing all the time within your institutions. Is that possible? We are moving in the correct path?
It's interesting because one of the challenges we have is we present things as is. We're not saying this was the right way of having a Haggadah or Pesach when we just saw the communist one, or the wrong way. We're saying this is how it is. We're facing very different type of diversity in Jewish communities in Europe that there were, you know, when I grew up in London, and certainly when my father grew up in Germany. But for us, that's why I was talking about authenticity. It's not about making judgments, but it's about presenting things as part of the fabric. Now, that's very challenging when you're dealing with built heritage, when you're talking about, as Ruth has just said, painting over what was before. I don't know what the answer is. I think, you know, awareness and having proper best practice standards, awards for people who are adhering to those could be some, and education could be some of the responses.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. Elise, I think it's your turn. You were asking for the time.
I mean, there's so much to talk about here. We'll have to dedicate at least another talk, at least one more because I mean, next time I want to really address one of Sally's commandments about thou shalt not go to every death camp, because I think this is all part of how, and I want to come back to what I talked about is what is our responsibility as a visitor? And I don't only mean a visitor who's coming to see, but people who come from the outside of the story, as Ruth, you know, an outsider comes. I mean, if the local people and the local history and the local heritage and the local community is not engaged, then it's an imposition or a correction from the outside, which doesn't mean it can't be negotiated. But you're right. Without that negotiation, it becomes something you import. It's like what you're going to buy an IKEA, you know, how to make IKEA heritage sites, you know, you end up having to call IKEA because there's a part missing. But if you're not doing this as a partnership with people at different levels, as you said, and educators at the core of these conversations, then you end up with things that are not authentic, are not respected. I mean, a cemetery is a sacred space, you know, and it deserves to be treated as such. So the question is, how do we make sure that as visitors, we are behaving appropriately, which means we're engaging. We can challenge with the understanding that we're having a dialogue, and it brings us back to what we're celebrating is dialogue. Without that conversation, what I see and what I think and whomever I speak, I don't move the needle in terms of being more familiar or more comfortable, and certainly not more respectful. So I think that's really an important piece of what we need to be doing. Especially in 2021 and in the decades to come.
So do you think, Elise, that it's a two-way round? It's not just the responsibility of the Jewish heritage site or place to offer certain experiences, but it's also responsibility of the visitor and the relation?
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, it depends on the site, and I'm not only talking about sites, but it's easier to imagine, but I think this is it, that's the dialogue. It's not only who prepares it and how it's worked through and resources that are gathered and people who, I mean, it's much better to have a committee. I mean, not that they're always so effective, but we would hope, but partners in the conversation. I mean, you want to argue it out before it's done and understand the reason. I mean, if I don't understand why you have this point of view, then how can I have a dialogue with you, right? So I need to know, and then in order to create something, or I don't know, renovate or even keep standing, then I need to consult with people here on the call and elsewhere to test things out. And I think we do have this dialogue is important. Really
Thank
important.
you, Liz. Karen, Ruth, do you want to?
I think that part of the challenge is that is part of the Judaism isn't monolithic, and there are sectors of Judaism who view things in a very different way. I mean, very different ways from those of us who are dealing with tourism and travel and restoration and signage and all of this. We deal this way. I mean, when I was, when it, and there are, I mean, I'm speaking as somebody who's secular. So let's put it flat out like that. I think about heritage in a very different way from how very religious people who honor the great rabbis and all of that, who feel, I feel about the tombs and the cemeteries very differently the way they do. And they sometimes feel proprietary interest in these places. I also sort of feel a proprietary interest in these places as historic sites, not necessarily as pilgrimage sites. These are two different worldviews. These are two different worldviews within the broad umbrella of Judaism and the broad umbrella of heritage. And to foster a dialogue here, I hope that it's somehow possible. But there are completely, there are different ways, very different ways of looking at the same places and the same objects, really. And in Israel, I visited in Safad, the cemetery there, and it says, women are not permitted past this point. I mean, that offends me. It doesn't offend the people who really believe in that tradition of Judaism. So that's how to, how do you reconcile that? How do you form discussions? How do you form a dialogue dealing with the physical site about that? Because they have different meanings.
Absolutely,
absolutely.
Carol, please.
You're raising issues which are woven through all of Jewish life, I think, as the way I experience it in Israel. This is not just about heritage sites, it's about the whole sort of gamut of religious practice. That's another whole discussion. I'm just, while you were talking and looking at some of the comments, I'm wondering whether there are such highly charged emotional feelings of non-Jewish people going to non-Jewish historic sites, reading the historic interpretation or narrative, and whether they care so much as the Jewish visitor does. I'm talking about, I'm not sort of saying, we're totally unique and no one else cares about their history, but there's something so emotionally loaded about visiting a Jewish site. I'm just curious to know whether other sites get sort of layered with all these different emotions. I don't know enough about.
Just go to Poland. Go to Poland and go to Częstochowa and go to the Shrine of the Black Madonna there. I visited there once with a group of rabbis and priests. This is years ago. It was an interfaith dialogue mission, and there was mainly American rabbis, American as well as Polish priests, Catholic priests. And in the American group, there was a Holocaust survivor also. It was a trip around, and there were scholars, rabbis, and this Holocaust survivor, and the even senior Polish Catholic clergy. And we went to Częstochowa, and the rabbis couldn't believe what they saw, the fervor of the religious pilgrimage to the Shrine of the Black Madonna, where the trumpets sound and the bejeweled sort of gate is lifted, and people go on their knees, walk on their knees.
Oh, I've
for
been
this icon.
I know, yes.
I mean, this fervor there. For us, we were looking at it as, for the Jews, we were looking at it as something else than these people were looking at it. For them, it was, the element in their life. For us, it was, another religion's, main shrine. But so, and I think for lay Catholics, probably have a different way of thinking about the Shrine of Częstochowa than really fervently believing Catholic. That I haven't discussed with people, but the fervor is there, and the differences in religious observance are also there. But right now we're talking about Jewish heritage, so this is
No, I mean, there's a whole conversation we can have about the monuments to slavery as well. Which
yes, definitely.
I'm very loaded. Which,
Yeah.
they were just statues that people passed by.
I gave a paper, and I've written a paper about some of the similarities between Jewish heritage in Europe and African American heritage and the tourism to them, which I can post it online. I can, but yes, I mean, it's really, people feel very, very powerfully. Many people feel very powerfully in ways that many other people do not feel. And some people feel powerfully about other things that the same people who feel powerfully about other things don't feel. So, I mean, there's all of this. It's mushed up together.
Absolutely, and in some way, I also agree with Karen. It's a very big challenge to deal with Jewish heritage, also because because of the divisions that we live in within the Jewish world. But I think that we can create the opportunity to establish some frameworks, because there's this dialogue, it's necessary. Again, this need of the negotiation between all the different sectors that are involved in Jewish heritage. So yes, in some way it's a risky business. I think that we need to start thinking to end this Jewish heritage hard talk. Before ending, I would like to say thank you to Karen, to Ruth, and Elise for bringing all these issues to the conversation. It's a big pleasure to share this space with you. And also, I would like to thank all the people that are participating and they are sharing this room. Also, I would like, because I know some of you, you are also Jewish heritage players, to acknowledge your work and to say thanks for the work you are doing all over the world. So having said that, thanks again, Ruth, Elise, and Karen, for all of you that are Jewish. Shana Tova, Gmar Chatima Tova, and have a very nice week. And I think that we will continue with these sessions, new guests, so stay tuned, and hope to see you again very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Ruth. Shana Tova.
Thanks for having me. And thank you to all the
Thank all of you.
There are some interesting comments. I hope next time that you'll be able to share those as well. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot, and see you all soon, I hope.
I hope so.
Bye. Thank you very much
Bye-bye.
again.
Bye.
Bye.